Hi, this is the review over the TEKS and ELPS that you will complete as an online sort of note-taking situation. Be prepared to kind of go over some of this in class, specifically kind of have a really good understanding of how the TEKS and ELPS work in a lesson plan. We're kind of going to practice that in class as long as we have enough time to when we meet on Wednesday. Our objectives for this particular presentation are to identify the alignment of the TEKS. We're not going to have a handout or anything. This is just a quick review, and we're not meeting in person to do the handout together. So this will kind of just be your own note-taking and reminding yourself of what the TEKS are and how they align. And then we're going to review the ELPS, and the case study, as mentioned here, is something that I mentioned previous that we'll kind of do in class to match up some information on a lesson plan with the TEKS and ELPS. The rationale for this is that the assumption is that you are in this course because you're going to be a certified teacher in Texas, and all lesson plans that teachers create or use in Texas public schools must be based on the standards. In Texas, those standards are called the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, or the TEKS. And all TEKS must be supported by a language proficiency standard. So the ELPS help support teaching the TEKS. And also, you'll be required to take a certification exam before you become a teacher. You must be certified, and you must pass the certification exam in order to do so. Because you are EC through 6 and ESL generalist and required to take the PPR EC through 12 exam, this is a good review of things that may be asked of you on your certification exams. Before the STAR exam that our students take beginning in 3rd grade was the TAKS. Before TAKS was something called TAS. Before that was something else, and before that was something else, and so on. So the whole idea of standardized testing is not new to Texas, but the emphasis on the importance of these tests and the results of these tests has become the topic of conversation, and it presents the idea that teachers teach just to be able to have their kids pass the standardized tests. There is a difference in each iteration of tests that are released. The TAKS test was not quite as rigorous as the STAR test. The TAS test before TAKS was not as rigorous as the TAKS test. So each iteration of standardized tests in Texas does have a little bit more complex answer figure outing. So in this example, the STAR has more questions with higher cognitive complexity to match the TEKS. So that would lend towards teaching to the standards, which in itself is not a bad thing. The standards are really great to have, and it kind of outlines what students should know. The idea that the students are under pressure to perform their knowledge on a test is where the standards become a sticky point. On the STAR, there is a greater emphasis on critical thinking, lots and lots of reading. In every grade level, the students take a reading STAR test starting in 3rd grade. There are fiction and nonfiction elements to the STAR, as well as more recently, over the last year, there has been an emphasis on poetry. The STAR test 4th and 7th grade requires writing. There is a writing STAR test specifically. In the past, the students have had to write personal narratives, which are just, they get a prompt and they write about a personal experience that might have something to do with that prompt. And then expository means nonfiction. So they're expected to write some kind of nonfiction piece in response to a prompt. Sometimes that could be how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, or kind of a how-to detailed piece of writing. Others could be read about an animal or a plant or some sort of science thing, and then write about what you read. So it gets a little more difficult on the STAR test than it has been in the past. There are processing skills in math and science and social studies. That is, so like if you're thinking of math and how you would solve a problem, there are questions about the processes of solving a math problem. And there are also open-ended questions on math and science. And if you think of a standardized test, that's generally given in a multiple choice situation. So open-ended questions in math and science on a multiple choice test becomes very difficult for children. So STAR has some kinks and wonkiness that definitely needs to be ironed out even still. And we're in about the 5th year of the STAR administration in Texas public schools. So the idea that each year students from 3rd grade on must take a standardized test, and that test is essentially based on the standards that the state sets for students to learn, for teachers to teach in the classroom. Specifically, the TEKS are, again, the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. The TEKS range across every content level. In this case, I'm going to focus specifically on the language arts skills or reading skills because that's what we're doing in our reading courses here. So the TEKS in the reading realm stretch across reading, writing, oral and written conventions, research, and then a little bit of listening and speaking. There is a little bit of an example here of what the TEKS look like. I'm going to go on the assumption that you've been doing this for a little while now and you have an idea of what the TEKS look like. But we need to talk about each component of the TEKS so that you have an understanding of how these are written, so that when you get into creating lesson plans, you understand exactly what the state and the standard is asking you to teach. So let's look at this example. We're looking at language arts. This is English, language arts, and reading, grade 3 example. So this is a TEK from the 3rd grade. 3rd grade TEKS, I should say. The beginning of the TEK lists the title of what you'll be teaching. So if you know you're going to be teaching fiction, you'll go to 3.8. The reading label here is the main strand of what's being taught. We're under the reading tab here. That's our strand. The component of the TEK is the comprehension of literary text. So our overall big picture is reading, and then we're going to narrow it down a little to a component of reading. In this case, how to understand written text or literary text. And then to break that down even further and to get more narrow, we have a subsection of literary text, which is, in this example, fiction. That could possibly also say nonfiction. It could say poetry. So know that the reading strand or the strand is the big picture. The component is a subheading or a component. And then it breaks even further into a subsection to get very specific. That whole piece is considered the tagline. The tagline. So this whole piece here is the tagline of the TEK. The knowledge and skill statements state exactly what the students should understand. Students understand, make inferences, and draw conclusions about the structure and elements of fiction and provide evidence from text to support their understanding. What that is saying is that as a teacher, when you teach reading, comprehension of literary text, fiction, at the end of your teaching, your students will understand, make inferences, and draw conclusions etc. To get there, the students are expected to, for this particular TEK, they are expected to sequence and summarize the plot's main events and explain their influence on future events, describe the interaction of characters, including their relationships and the changes they undergo, and identify whether the narrator or speaker of this story is first person or third person. These are 3 individual pieces of one TEK, which means there are a whole bunch of things you must teach when it comes to reading, comprehension of literary text, and fiction. And this is just one TEK under that tagline. So I suggest, and most people who make lesson plans would suggest, that you not teach more than 1 or 2 at a time. It may take a while for your students to be able to understand, make inferences, and draw conclusions when you're teaching them how to sequence and summarize a plot's main events and explain their influence on future events. So if you are going to teach this, I suggest breaking it out into its parts and teaching only part of this entire TEK. The student expectations become what the students are tested on later. So the STAR test is going to offer them a piece of text that they have to read, and then they have to answer questions about what they've read. There may be questions about plot, and they want the student to pick the best answer with the best summary of the plot of the story they've just read. Or they may ask on the STAR test a question about a character and that character's motivations throughout the story. That would hit our student expectation B. Or the question may ask about the point of view of a story that the students have read on the STAR test. So they will need to know the differences between a first-person narrator and a third-person narrator. This is what you must teach. You must teach A, B, and C, not all together, but hopefully one following the other or all within the context of our subsection, which is when you teach a fictional novel or a fictional story. These are the things that you would hit as a teacher with a 3rd grade class of students who are learning how to read. Here are some more specific details about the TEKs. In Texas, the TEKs are the standard upon which all curriculum is based. They are non-negotiable. Every single lesson plan that is created by a Texas certified public school teacher must include a TEK. The TEKs are not a scope and sequence. You can't start from number 1 and start teaching there and just keep going to number 2 to number 3 and so on. A scope and sequence is just that, where you start with one thing, you can turn the page, and the next day you do the next, whatever's on the next page, and so on. The TEKs don't do that. The TEKs are not a course outline. So same with the scope and sequence, you can't kind of start with day 1 and just build on that one. You can kind of bounce around and build from there. The TEKs are also not all of the essential knowledge and skills that your students should have. There are gazillions of TEKs, but that's obviously not everything your students are going to be learning. Don't forget, though, that because there are a gazillion TEKs, it's not possible to teach them all in 1 year. There may be a few that you even have to loop repeatedly throughout a year, which means you're not going to be able to hit all of them in a year anyway. What the TEKs do is outline the most important essential knowledge and skills that students should have, organizes around big ideas like fiction or nonfiction, and those items within those subsections that are connected. The TEKs do less in more depth. So they're not very specific, but they allow you to go deeper into your teaching with that lack of specificity. The TEKS content builds and connects across grade levels, and this is called vertical alignment. You'll notice if you look back at the TEKS from Kinder that a kindergarten reader in that same tagline, reading literary, comprehension of literary text / fiction, there is that same tagline in kindergarten. And the students in kinder are supposed to have some knowledge of a story's plot. In fact, the kindergarten TEK would say, recall the events that happened in a story. In first grade, that same tagline exists, yet the TEK is worded slightly differently to show that the students should be able to show what they've learned in kinder and then build on that in first grade. That's what we call vertical alignment. From kinder, the base is there. First grade, you're adding to that base and sort of building on your foundation. Then you move to second grade, building more on your foundation. That goes all the way up to 12th grade in Texas public schools. The ELPS are the English Language Proficiency Standards. These have been in place in Texas for quite some time now, but they were not always part of teaching, not always part of lesson plans. The ELPS outline instructions that school districts must provide to English language learners in order for them to have the full opportunity to learn English and to succeed academically. Please note the difference in the TEKS and the ELPS is that the TEKS are the standards. They're the big subjects and all the things the students need to know, all of the students need to know. The ELPS are specifically written to support teaching the TEKS specifically for students who don't speak English at home. That doesn't mean that the ELPS are not appropriate for all students, because it is appropriate teaching to teach all students the same way, but the ELPS were created specifically to better support language learners in Texas schools. The ELPS are to be implemented as an integral part of the required curriculum in foundation and enrichment subjects of the TEKS for students who are English learners. The ELPS don't change from grade to grade. The ELPS are static. So whatever ELP you might possibly use to help a kindergartner enrich his speaking skills exists as the same ELP for a 10th grader who needs to enrich his speaking skills. So know that the ELPs apply across curriculum, any subject, any grade level. The ELPs do not change depending on grade level or subject. There are 5 categories of ELPs, which are also known as student expectations. The first would be learning strategies, and these are essentially just learning strategies that you would plan to use in your lesson, where the students are learning how to strategically learn how to listen better, speak better, or read better, or write better. Again, these apply from grades K through 12 and do not change depending on subject or grade level. When our students come to us, they are assessed to identify what their level of English ability is. And depending on the results of the assessments, the students are given a descriptor of their current abilities. These are called the proficiency level descriptors. And these descriptors identify what the students can do or possibly cannot do at their particular level. So a student who has little or no ability to speak English only answers in quick yes, no's, maybe, lots of head shaking, possibly even some no habla inglés. Beginning level speakers are at that level. You would see in their writing no English at all. They would not be able to read anything in English. And again, listening and speaking, very, very, very minimal, if at all, response toward English. An intermediate level English learner is gonna have a little bit better understanding of English. There may be a few words that they've caught on to. There may be some environmental signs like stop signs and exit signs and where's the bathroom kind of signs that come a little easier to them. There may be some simple responses, especially spoken responses by an intermediate speaker. The idea that an intermediate may be able to read, they can be an intermediate level reader, but a beginner level writer. So the PLDs, or the proficiency level descriptors, can change depending on that student's ability. But an intermediate level reader or writer is going to have, again, very limited ability to read or write in English. The advanced level English language learners are able to listen, speak, read, and write very well in English, yet there are still some aspects to their ability to use the language that isn't the advanced high level. So advanced level speakers are pretty close to being native, yet there are still some grammatical issues in their writing or possibly their speaking. In this, we don't consider spelling as a descriptor. So if a student's a really great speller, but they're still getting their sentence structure kind of not right, then they're not going to be considered an advanced high student. They're going to be advanced. If they spell terribly, but they're writing good sentences, just the words are spelled wrong, they may be considered advanced high. The only slightly difference in an advanced and advanced high student is that an advanced high language learner, you wouldn't be able to tell that that learner was not a native English speaker. Advanced high students, you would hear them speak and think that they speak English at home. You would look at their writing and you would think that they've been writing since they were young as an native English speaker or writer. When a student is identified in a school district, they are assessed every year in their ELL program, ESL programs in their schools. Once they assess and reach the advanced high level on all 4 domains, listening, speaking, reading, and writing, they are then exited out of their ESL program. Once they exit out as advanced high listening, speaking, reading, and writing domains, then they are monitored for 2 years and moving on from there. So once they hit advanced high, they're good to go. For the proficiency level descriptors, there's a slight difference in reading and writing as to what the descriptions are because of ages of these students. So for listening and speaking, the proficiency level descriptors apply from K to 12. They're the same across the board from kindergarten to 12th grade. But when it comes to reading, there are specific descriptors for kinder and first graders, and then slightly different descriptions for 2nd through 12th grade, and same thing for writing. Kinder and first have very specific descriptors for writing, and then slightly different for 2 through 12. Here's an example of an ELP. It looks similar to a TEK, but remember that the ELPs don't change throughout grade level or subject or content area. This is an example of the listening ELPs. Remember that learning strategies is first, so where you see a number 2 here, this is the second category of the ELPS. The first category is the learning strategies. So this is just an example of the listening ELPS. So if you see here, this is cross-curricular second language acquisition and listening. So cross-curricular means across the content. These students are learning to acquire a language, specifically in this case to improve their listening skills. We want our students to be able to distinguish sounds and intonation patterns of English, recognize elements of English with newly acquired vocabulary such as long and short vowels and so on. I'm not going to read all of them to you, but I want you to look through this and note that if we were going to create a lesson plan using our TEAK from our previous example, the reading slash literary comprehension slash fiction, and we were maybe teaching the students how to recall a plot, which of these TEAKs would we want, ELPs, which of these ELPs would we want our students to use to be able to strengthen their ability to recall the plot? In this case, they're listening, and we want them to be able to recall. So just a quick exercise. Take a moment to consider which one of these ELPs would you use with a group of students if you were teaching them how to sequence a plot and talk about it. We are going to work on something similar to this in class, but only briefly because of time. So I want you thinking about that TEAK, that third grade TEAK, and take a look at the ELPs, not just the listening, but also the speaking and the reading and the writing, and see how an ELP might match up with what you have to teach when we're talking about teaching comprehension of literary texts and fiction. If you need more information, especially on things like the requirements for our students, our ELL students in public schools, and how to become a committee member and be an advocate for these for our ELLs, check out the TELPAS and LPAC information here at the TEA website that's listed. For STAR information, TEA also gives you everything you need to know about the STAR. And then if you need more access to the TEAKs, there's also a link there for you. I will make sure that a copy of the ELPs and the TEAKs are uploaded to Tracks for you so that you have access to that. If you don't already have the app for the TEAKs that is available to you in your app store, go ahead and download that. It would be great for you to have it so that if we are in the middle of creating a lesson plan and you need to find a TEAK, you'll have access to it on your phone. We are going to be creating lesson plans that you will present in your mentor teachers class, and we'll be doing that pretty soon. So become familiar with that and have access to ease there for the TEAKs. Thanks so much for your attention on this one, and hopefully you have questions that I can help answer on Wednesday when we get to class. Otherwise, I will see you Wednesday. Thanks.